All right, you beautiful humans, are we starting to see a retreat back to the offices now that Google and other tech and finance companies are forging ahead with getting employees back under one respective roof? And is this going to drive the possibility of remote work out of the hearts and minds that are really trying to hold on to their work from home situation? Well, I would actually like to take a look at both from a perspective of an employee, which I have been, and of course the employer, which I currently am. And one of the things that I think we do need to clear up, though, is that I think that we all understand that this work from home, remote work, and eventual Great Resignation was fueled by, let's just call it the pastrami. And as a clinician, I've been working with more pastrami that could really last me several lifetimes. And I'm not making light of how this may have impacted you or a loved one, but I'm just trying to avoid any pop-ups and disclaimers here on YouTube, as this is not in any way clinical advice. But as much as this has really accelerated this movement, some of us have now had the opportunity to see what the benefits of remote work are, and including those that may have like a disability that previously limited certain employment options, which I don't think this is often discussed. However, there are still very much some challenges that we continue to face. And I'd like to look at it from a different angle, that this isn't just about the pastrami anymore. And not that this isn't a factor, but people are realizing that this is something that we're going to be living with for a while. However, with this new perspective, we're now thinking about our global health and our relationships with money, with time, and of course, with those individuals that we're really doing all of this for, even if it's just for ourselves, because, the love does start here. But we obviously still have a disconnect that some HR departments are aware of when surveying C-level executives, thinking that the company's current benefits package is really serving the needs of the employees, when in fact, there's still a gap as to that interpretation, which is why we're starting to see more voluntary benefit options being offered, such as remote work indefinitely, which it's starting to show an increase in applicants for those positions, but also for those that want more of a hybrid experience. And as I've said before, that in certain situations, it doesn't really have to be an all or nothing scenario, which will address some of the other benefits. But I think we first have to understand why employees may want to actually head back to an office environment, at least part-time, and some maybe even wanting that to be closer to a full-time. And we can take a look at a variety of factors here in play, but for those that have had very little to no experience, including a dedicated workspace at home, this was a massive learning curve on how to make this a successful endeavor. And I'm not just talking about productivity, because according to several companies and HR departments, including my business, it seems that employees were delivering on that work, and really then some. However, flipping back to the corporate environment, the issue quickly became apparent that it was really at the expense of the health of both physically and mentally of the employee, likely secondary to having been conditioned over the years that working in a corporate office is just what people did. They slowly became accustomed to that culture, whether it was good or bad, and somehow found themselves in a routine, which we are creatures of habit, and it's very hard to break that cycle. And previous to 2020, I've seen those studies that showed actual productivity in a typical workday landing on the low end of 3 hours a day. But when some companies started to see a trend in increased productivity from those working remotely in the last couple of years, likely almost doubling that productivity, or that output rather, in certain industries, I'm sure that they were pretty pleased by these results and thinking that this must be great, on the surface, because employees must be happier being able to do this work from the comfort of their homes, which seems like a big benefit. And so initially, this may have been assumed as a balance between the two. However, going back to that conditioning of the traditional office that we've experienced in our lifetimes, and then shifting it to working from home, many may have been unable to actually find that balance, and having really a more difficult time with the isolation that can occur, and possibly a not so supportive home environment. And of course, another big offender, aside from everything else that happens in the home, which would be time management. But I also want to point out that some of the data that we were seeing internally was that this was also being driven by the fact that employees were concerned about the sandwich, and of course, therefore didn't really have a desire or opportunities to access their communities in the same way, or really at all, which gives more context to the walls closing in on us. However, now that it seems that communities are starting to open back up to a degree in some areas, this allows for more access, more interaction, engagement. And I do think that we need to continue looking at these numbers as we start to establish more of what people thought working remotely was like, which actually brings me back to the other voluntary benefits, and specifically those that are really juggling a busy household with either kids or caring for a loved one. And that is, of course, both flexibility in those work schedules and for those that want to and are able to have on-site daycare options, which I have personally also spent years working in that space as a childcare health consultant. And let me just say that whether an individual is wanting to come back to the office full or part-time, or they just want to continue to work remotely, the need for childcare, it still exists. But I've seen threads where these families are waitlisted constantly. And even as we head into the summer months where there are camps available, there are still almost immediately, like, these families are placed on a wait list due to the high demand. So for all of the employers out there, I take a hard look at implementing these services if you have or can build this into your infrastructure. Now, there is another study indicating that about 64% of employees that worked remotely but hadn't previously, they did state that they felt more productive at home. And I think you can continue to split this out into scenarios such as having a dedicated workspace and, like, in the home, the technology and resources available to the employee to effectively get the job done, which I know it was important for us to have cameras and audio and lighting for my teams. And I understand that I'm a bit biased toward that technology. It's obvious, but also having the autonomy and respect from their colleagues of getting work done while still juggling the personal schedules, which many of us, like, having a look into each other's personal lives through that lens certainly helps us feel more aligned, because this is like, it's an endeavor that we're all trying to succeed at. And I can say that since our kids, like personally, our kids' soccer season just started back up, and that balance becomes even more critical. So another optional benefit for employers to consider and for teams to establish would be trying to set up some core working hours so that the team feels connected during those times, either in person or remote. And I know this might sound next to impossible, because the response might be that it was already hard enough to sync up schedules before all of this, like, ever happened. But this also may have been because in-office time was significantly longer. And honestly, some of those meetings could have just been avoided with a phone call, an email, or in the Slack channel. So if you're setting up core, like, work or meeting hours, and I understand that this is an industry dependent issue, but those industries that are able to navigate this path will continue to attract the talent that they seek. And as an employer, it is still the employee that has the leverage here, which is why I want to really address one of the biggest issues I see when it comes to continuing to implement this approach to work and what we need to continue to iterate on, and that is both ego and middle management. And as much as these may seem to be a package deal, I do believe that there are some fantastic managers out there that are just, in fact, really good leaders in their own right and do bring value. But I know the argument will probably stand that these are massive obstacles getting in the way of the return to office. I think that this might, like, warrant a separate video, because I know that both employers and employees have contributed to the practice of often looking top heavy in an organization, because, like, most were looking for some kind of upward momentum. And I'm not just talking about salary, but more along the lines of title. And I personally know organizations that are literally creating titles just to appease the employee. And it is definitely more nuanced than this, because any HR director or team would tell you that there's also a balance of what that title really means when it comes to that particular industry, and like when it comes to managing certain budgets, projects, and most importantly, other members of that team. And it's certainly not doing that individual any good if you're just creating titles that don't follow that level of responsibility, because let's say eventually, like, that individual decides to go to another company with a similar title, but really never performed the duties of that job, and it just became more of a ceremonial position and not actually really providing any real value here. So in the end, it really is just a huge disservice on both sides of it. And honestly, how many directors of special projects can one company really have? But aside from bringing your dog to work, having unlimited PTO, on-site legal counseling, telehealth and on-site wellness consultations, free parking, or whatever the benefit. However, it would be naive to think that work as the employee knows it right now, that it wouldn't continue to shift and evolve because the Googles, the Apples, and other massive companies are trying to bring workers, employees back on site to some degree. However, it would also be naive of the employer to also think that just because these companies are shifting back to on site, that in your business, that you will also have the same leverage, reach, and influence on the culture of work. And that if you keep the employees just hungry enough, that they'll return back to see what's in the office fridge, and then they just end up back in the same routines and office space in pre-Pastrami times. But I want to say, let's not fool ourselves here, fellow business owners, that we are not Apple, we're not Google, or whatever the equivalent would be in your industry. So we may find ourselves continuing to study, poring over the data, and investing back into resources that keep our current teams intact while still being able to be competitive and able to attract talent and support new talent. The businesses that can figure out and invest in resources to offer new employees or less seasoned team members access to mentorship opportunities with someone that is more seasoned and even specializes in relationship building and company culture, or even additional management training opportunities to better assist a remote employee with their career trajectory, that is where we're going to be finding success and, of course, new business opportunities. But this also comes back to being more purposeful with your time and more purposeful and considerate of work, really becoming more flexible. And whether it's fully remote for some or a hybrid approach for others, I don't believe that work as we once knew it will ever 100% go back to the way that it used to be. But this will also take a collective approach, because for those of you who have felt disempowered as an individual and that there is just no way that you by yourself could ever impact change, well, for many of you, you are in a position to use this leverage for good. And of course, the same goes for businesses, because I know that when an employee feels supported, well compensated, and has the resources and autonomy to get that work done, then it does become a more purpose-driven situation, and you start to see the return on your own bottom line. And when you're not constantly onboarding new employees because everyone is just quitting, which in the end costs way more than retaining the talent that you currently have. And as much as I am not naive to a 14-hour workday, but that expectation to have an employee adopt the same sense of purpose and lifestyle because of the vision, it just has basically taken a nosedive off of a cliff. For those of you that want to hold the line, I do hear you. I get it. It is the collective voice. We're just going to have to find some balance on both sides, though. And certainly I encourage you to explore those options that may offer a hybrid experience, which may give you the best option for more balance and really help you rediscover that pretty much your entire identity doesn't revolve around what you do for a living. But I am ready for the tree hugger comments or get a real job keyboard warriors here. And hey, if you want, why don't you just come work with me? But I want to continue another video to also address the questions or concerns that folks may have when it comes to mass transit, service-based industries, and other businesses that may have had to look for a pivot in this ever-changing landscape, because people are still going to be getting their hair cut, using cleaning services, hiring architects and contractors, and ordering food and drinks, and definitely paying plenty in property taxes. I know that I am. Anyway, I do appreciate your time here. You go out there and rock those faces, and let's hang out here again on the next one.